Hello and welcome to my hotel room, the location for this week's episode of Birdseeds Uncut. I'm on the last night of a long 21-day whirlwind cross-country work trip, and that is the reason there haven't been any videos, also the reason this is another one of the Uncut variety. Now, I wish I had something more pleasant to talk about than the end of the season, but I don't. So, quick wrap up on that, and then I'm going to get to some things that you wanted me to talk about because that's way more fun. Now, the series against the Cubs clearly didn't go how we would have liked, but to be honest, I'm not really that surprised. The Cardinals were outpitched, they were out-hit, they were outmanaged. They were just outplayed by a team that was at its peak when they needed to be and not struggling to kind of climb back up the hill to a place where they were able to compete pretty comfortably, like we've seen the Cardinals do at other times this season. Now, that doesn't really take away from what they did in the regular season. In fact, I think that it almost makes their 100-win regular season more impressive because they were able to hold off the Cubs and hold off the Pirates while being pretty well crippled most of the year by injuries and having a lot of guys not play at their peak level all at the same time. So all the things that they played through and played around and made work in their favor in the regular season, I think the postseason short run really made it obvious that what they did in the regular season was quite remarkable. And it's frustrating to see them not be able to turn that into a championship, but it's a remarkable feat nonetheless. But I don't want to talk about it because they didn't win, and I don't really want to talk about the Cubs anymore. So let's move on to some things that you suggested I talk about on Twitter. Mark Norton, first of all, had a great idea that I should divide the season into thirds and give player awards for each third of the season. Awesome idea, way too much content for this short video format, but I'm going to hold on to that and might do it later. So let's move on. Let's see. The year-long hitting, pitching slump at season's end, and the off-season. The hitting was inconsistent. That's the best word to describe it. I mean, you had guys that are pretty well all or nothing in Matt Adams, Randall Grichuk, Mark Reynolds, Brandon Moss. I mean, the list starts to add up, and when you either have a strikeout or a home run, it's hard to keep innings going, and that's what the Cardinals really needed. But then you also had guys like Matt Carpenter, Jason Hayward, Colton Wong, Yadier Molina that were pretty streaky. They were either really great for a week or two or really awful for a week or two, and that's, again, not a good way to keep innings rolling. And then your big hitters, Matt Holliday was hurt, Johnny Peralta just sometimes disappeared completely, and that didn't help at all. So the hitting was inconsistent, and you're not going to win that way. I think that's one of the big things they do need to improve in the offseason, which could be interesting because there are a lot of holes to fill, but there are a lot of ways that they can do it. And one of those things has to do with the pitching at the end of the season. Now, I think it's important to remember that they were pitching without Carlos Martinez, who was one of the most consistent starters this season. So I think if you add him into the postseason equation, it may be a different story. But the reality is the starting rotation was pretty well run into the ground. And it's hard to ask those guys to go out and pitch as well as they did early on in the season every time they go out there. And when they can't make a mistake because the offense can't pick them up, it's not going to work out very well. What else do we have here? Winning 100 games despite the lack of offense. Kind of talked a little bit about that, but it was the pitching. The pitching is what carried them through. The pitching is what gave them the backbone enough to be able to win a lot of those close games, which seems like that's all they played. What else we got? Jaime Garcia's options. Well, there are options. I think the big question is the risk of a potentially not very dependable starting pitcher worth the reward of a guy with a huge upside, a very different look, a lefty out of the rotation? I mean, I didn't expect much from him at all this season, but what he did was extremely positive. And if he can do that on a full season basis, then absolutely. I just don't know if you can trust that. So that's the balance they have to find. Did Tony Cruz earn a bigger role in 2016? I think what did happen, whether it's Tony Cruz or someone else, is that the Cardinals should have, everyone else saw it, realized that they have to have a better situation with a backup catcher. Whether it's Tony Cruz, who all of the players seem to trust completely, or someone else that can come in and maybe be a little more consistent at the plate, although when you never play, it's hard to develop any consistency. But this is 2 seasons in a row that Yadier Molina was pretty much run into the ground and not available in October. They can't keep doing that. Whether Yadi wants to come out of the game or not, Mike Matheny has to stop thinking like a player and think like a manager and realize that that's what's best for his team in October and make that situation work. So it might be Tony Cruz, it might be somebody else, but I think that backup catcher situation has to get better. And who will we say bye to this winter? I don't think John Lackey sticks around. I think that the Cardinals are going to get outbid for him. I know that Mozeliak has already talked about Brandon Moss. I don't really see a reason or a role for him on this team, so I'd like to say probably not Brandon Moss, but thanks for playing. And then I think the big question is obviously Jason Hayward, which ties into the next question that I'm not too happy about. Who will replace Hayward's production when they get outbid for him? Hello, I'm like the biggest Team Hayward person ever. So I really just hope they get this deal done with Hayward and we can move on. But realistically, I think it's very similar to the Matt Holliday deal in 2009. We didn't think they were going to go big with him, but Hayward's only 26. If there's a time to go big with a deal, it's probably now, with a guy like Jason Hayward that does so many things well that you can kind of build that outfield around, especially when Matt Holliday is done and not out there anymore. So I don't want to talk about who's going to replace him because I would like to think that he's not going to be one of those that we say goodbye to. But if he does, there's this Stephen Piscotty kid he's all right, I guess. Is Matt Adams back in 2016? I'm going to say yes. I think that he is, except that if they don't pick up the option on Jaime Garcia, or if Jason Hayward walks, I think Matt Adams could be a piece of a trade that brings back a significant return. We've seen him be streaky. We've seen that there are some flaws in his approach at the plate. But we also know that when he gets on a roll, he's a pretty nice bat to have in the order as well. So I don't think he goes anywhere, but I think that that also kind of depends on what happens with these bigger free agent guys. Did I get everything in? Because I've tried to record this video 3 times and it stopped recording on me. So I think we got it. Guys, the off season is upon us. Hopefully I'll have a little time to do a more involved season recap, or at least talk a little bit more about the things that could be coming up in the next few months. But man, it's been a fun year. Can't take that away. It's been a stressful year. And in fact, I think Lance Lynn probably said it best. I listened to an interview with him this morning and he was talking about his own pitching, but I think it applied to the season and the team as a whole. He said it wasn't terrible, but it kind of felt terrible, which is a weird way to end a season, to end a video. Maybe I should have thought about that. But nonetheless, it felt pretty terrible at a lot of points this season, but it was a fun ride, man. There were so many highs, there were a lot of lows, and I'm ready to do it again. Bring on spring training. Can't wait for more baseball. See you later, guys. Next time on Birdseeds.